So I got home at around 11 p.m. Late night at the office turned into an even later night at the bar. So about 4 drinks deep at this point, I'm tired and I'm just about ready to fall asleep as I stumble through the doorway and I lay down on the couch and I reach for my bag of joints, spark one up, I just pull up YouTube on my laptop. Well, I'm in the middle of watching some luxury cruise tour, close to passing out when I hear the front door open. I sit up, turn my head slightly, just enough to see my roommate coming in. He hangs his jacket in the closet and doesn't say anything and walks slowly to his room, which is normal enough. I've been living with him for about 3 months, long enough for me to pick up on most of his tendencies. The guy really doesn't talk unless spoken to, which was far from a problem for me. He also genuinely kept things clean on his end, never causing much in the way of problems. I really couldn't complain, so I just go back to watching YouTube. About 5 minutes later, I hear the shower in his room turn on. Once again, nothing strange. At this point, I'm watching bare-knuckle boxing highlights with my eyes half open. Maybe 1 or 2 minutes away from passing out, and I remember waking up in darkness, my head hurting, my throat dry as hell. I sat up slowly, waiting for the grogginess to settle into something manageable, and once it did, I grabbed my phone, checked the time. Around 3:30 a.m., from what I remember, I was starving, so, I got up, began walking towards the fridge, and then I noticed it. A soft but ever-present noise in the background, and it took me a few seconds to really recognize what it was. It's a shower. Suddenly, the events of last night began replaying in my head, drinking at the bar, Ubering home, laptop, couch, my roommate coming home, the shower turning on. So I stood there for a while trying to make sense of it. Maybe he went to bed and forgot to turn it off? I shook my head. No way that had happened, I thought. Although maybe he slipped and fell. By realizing the implications of this, I rushed towards his room but found his bathroom door locked. I began pounding on it. Hey man, hey, are you alright? No response. I considered kicking the door down, but decided to call 911 before I did that. I took my phone out, preparing to dial, when I noticed that I had an unread text. One from my roommate. Hey man, I couldn't sleep, so I went over to my girlfriend's place, not sure when I'll be back. That was sent 2 hours ago. I looked at the bathroom door, then back down on my phone. Everything about this was wrong. Okay, first of all, my roommate barely texts me, certainly never to tell me that he's going out. Second of all, I know for a fact that he's single, he has been for a while. And third of all, who the fuck was in the shower then? I tried calling him. No answer. I sent him some texts. No response. I walked over to his desk and saw that his keys and wallet were still beside his laptop. My head's starting to spin at this point, and I get out of there, I go back into the living room, and I turn on the lights, and I'm pacing around in a circle trying to follow the plot, while also trying to ignore the shower, a noise I could have never imagined being so dreadful in any context. But sometime later, I hear something vibrating on the kitchen counter. I move toward it, and I see that it's a phone. It's my roommate's phone. So the panic begins setting in, and immediately I grab my keys, run out of the apartment. I make my way down the hall. I take the stairs down to the lobby, but even that doesn't seem far enough away, so I make my way over to the McDonald's across the street. So I sit there for a while, considering calling the cops, but for some reason feeling too nervous to do so. But even though there's hardly anybody in there, the place begins to feel suffocating, and I decide to leave, walking back out into the empty streets. Almost immediately I get this feeling that I'm being watched. I feel my gaze drifting up and towards the apartment. Soon I'm looking at my balcony and I see somebody standing there. A dark figure stood completely straight, stiff to the point where it nearly resembles a mannequin, but it isn't. If I look closely, I can see it just slightly swaying. I froze in place, my mind hardly able to understand or accept what I was seeing. It's not my roommate. It's too tall. In fact, it's too tall to be anybody I know. Its head nearly scraping the bottom of the balcony above. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make out any of its details. The darkness and the distance may have been enough to explain that away, but there was something about it that drove me towards a different conclusion. This thing simply possessed no details that could have been observed. The only element of its composition was that of the unadulterated darkness. Of course, my gut instinct was to get the hell away from it, but the voice in my head was telling me that if I were to try and run, this thing would end up following me. So I went back to the McDonald's instead, locking myself in the bathroom as I finally dialed 911. I told the operator that somebody had broken into my apartment, but that I had gotten out of there without them noticing. But they were still in there. It was the story that most accurately represented the situation without making me come across as batshit. So the operator told me they'd be sending somebody over and for me to hang tight. I left the bathroom, waiting at the table closest to the exit until I could see the red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. I went outside to meet the cops, looking up at the balcony to find it empty, though the door to the living room had been left open. They pelted me with a bunch of questions that I found difficult to answer. Is the intruder armed? Do I have any idea who it might be? What are their intentions? I told them I don't know. I couldn't figure it out, but they just kept on asking. So soon I was practically yelling at them to go up there and check it out for themselves, and I suppose the terror in my voice was enough for them to begin taking it seriously. They told me to wait by the entrance, and I watched on as they entered the building. I was out there for a long time, growing increasingly anxious at the thought of what they were going to tell me when they came down. A few minutes later, the silence was broken by a single muffled gunshot. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I continued to wait there, unsure of what to do otherwise. 20 more minutes of silence, and the officers still hadn't come down. Soon I could hear more of them approaching in the distance. Before I knew it, 4 more cop cars had pulled up around me, and the scene had fallen into chaos. Officers shouting over each other into the radios, more questions being hurled my way, none of which I was able to answer. The next few sequences were mostly a blur, but I remember the building being evacuated, the tenants frightened and confused as they were ushered outside while the officers became more and more frantic. I remember hearing more scattered gunshots, some screaming, other noises that were difficult to make sense of. There are a few lapses in my memory after that, but I recall being pushed into the back of a police car. After being driven to the station, I was led into one of the interrogation rooms where I found 2 nondescript men in suits waiting for me. They didn't introduce themselves, and immediately went into a series of questions, each one more bizarre than the last. What company was your roommate employed by? What was the nature of their job? How many different people have been inside your apartment since your roommate moved in? Have you ever heard voices inside the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m., voices that didn't belong to your roommate? Have you ever seen a circle of people standing outside the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? People that were exceptionally tall. And one of the most unsettling ones, have you ever seen somebody standing at the foot of your bed upon waking up between the hours of midnight and 3 a.m., only for them to disappear moments later? If so, do you remember what they looked like? Any distinct features? As they continued probing me, my mind began conjuring up some of the strange shit that had happened after my roommate had moved in. Shit that I had written off as figments of my imagination simply because I had no other explanation for them. I did hear the voices, always coming from the room next to mine when my roommate slept. I was always so tired when I heard them, but I do remember it either sounding like a young woman or a man with an extremely deep voice. I could never make out any words. It always sounded like gibberish. And then there was that one time where I went to the bathroom in the middle of the night, still half asleep. I didn't bother turning the lights on as I entered, but as my eyes began adjusting to the darkness, I could have sworn that somebody was already sitting on the toilet. Somebody extremely tall. Of course, when I turned on the lights, there was nothing there. It was easy to chalk it up as a product of late-night drowsiness at the time. I've never really thought about it since. After doing my best to give them useful information, the suits spent a good few minutes taking notes on their phones. And once they were done, they sat up quickly, told me they'd be in touch, and they left the room. The cop came in a few minutes later, told me that since I couldn't return to the apartment, they'd set me up in a nearby hotel until they were able to get the situation under control, and that I should stay put until they gave me a call. What happened? I asked him. What'd you guys find up there? He stared at me for a long time. Not as if he were deep in thought, but as if he were held deep aversions for what he was considering telling me. Eventually, he just shook his head. I don't know, he said. I mean, I really don't know. I nodded, trying to smile, though I'm sure it didn't come across very well. It's the next day now, and I'm in the hotel. Of course, I couldn't sleep, couldn't really eat. Officer hasn't called me yet. When I tried searching up information about the evacuation on the internet, all I could find are articles claiming that it was due to a fire. A fucking fire. Update, I fell asleep and I just woke up. It's 1 a.m. now. I can hear the shower. Hey everyone, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I want to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video or for listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. Also, hitting the subscribe button on that podcast and or that YouTube video channel, because whenever you do that, it helps me be alive, which I very much appreciate, because if I'm not alive, And finally, as always, I want to thank everybody who is on my Patreon list. Especially, I want to give a huge thank you to Triller Tier Jackal, Brian Figueroa, Ethan Leon, Polaris Prospect X, Lake Rattler, Viceroy Scorn, Disciple, Delaney Melton, Strategy, Wolf Jameson, John G. Luna, SullyMan, Juan Mendoza, Rock Bottom Smasher, Elias Naharo, Brandon Mendoza, Sneck, Brimstone Pendulum, Caltuna, William Wellington, Scruffy the Janitor, Victoria Schwartz, Victoria Miles, Aaron, Emma, Kemza, Brenda Crow, Elijah Munson, LaQueda Canizales, MrCreepyPasta Peebus Pleaser, Travis, Smiley of Psychotic, Richard Sundell, Buddha B, Dante Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, Mephistopheles, CursepoxPrimarch, M, Jettis Pet, VerbalHorror, Kearns, Mike, himbojerry, CrusaderChocobo, Corbin Dallas, Estebean, Hour Minute Second Time, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Red Shadow Cat, Turtleman, Mr. Marcus Splits, Dirt Diver 030, Voice of Sand, Psychomel, Melted Lake, Tolly Sue, Cronut 509, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Hades Nephew, Tommy Wall, Tommy Walters, Acid System, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, Corey X Kenshin, Diana Kraus, Jordan Humble, a man of many names, and every single one of you that's down there in the description, every single one of you that is able to give even $1, man, I cannot thank you all enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You guys are wonderful. You really do make my life easier, and I appreciate it greatly. To all of you out there, have a wonderful evening and sweet dreams.